Welcome back to Occupy the Media. I'm Jared Jakang Mayer, and I'm here occupying our studio with FSTV Executive Director Don Rojas and news producer Marcy Miranda. The 2012 election will be here before we know it. In this segment, we want to talk about the electoral issues that impact the 99%. With us is Karanja Gashusha. He's an activist with the Occupy Wall Street in New York. Karanja, how you doing there?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we really wanted to have you in here because not only are you involved heavily with Occupy Wall Street there in New York, but you are also formerly an analyst, a financial analyst there on Wall Street. And this story about how the 99% often pays for the greed on Wall Street, and it has to do with JP Morgan Chase recently announcing that it could lose up to $5 billion because of a, quote, errors, sloppiness, and bad judgment. So this was on a trading desk there at JP Morgan and lost at least $2 billion, but the number has been rising recently. It has been said over and over again that this doesn't affect the stability necessarily of JP Morgan Chase, that this is a bank that will be able to survive even this huge of a loss. But what does this really have to do with the average American, do you think? Does it really affect them that a bunch of big bankers lost a bunch of money?
Of course, it has everything to do with the average American, because this money that the banks trade and essentially gamble with is your pension plan. It's your brokerage account. So, for example, if you have an E-Trade account, investment banks don't manufacture money, right? And they don't create things to sell. They don't manufacture. They are not factories. All they do is deal with cash, and they create these products, swaps, essentially over-the-counter derivatives, which are so-called, ironically, over-the-counter, but in fact they're traded under the table in secret. One of the attempts at Dodd-Frank was to make them traded in exchanges, and that has not been implemented. And I don't really know that it will ever be implemented. But essentially, this is your money. Yeah.
Well, and what you just touched on there, Karanja, is pretty interesting because this is particularly embarrassing for JP Morgan because their CEO, Jamie Dimon, has been at the front of the pack in denouncing new financial regulations within Dodd-Frank, particularly the Volcker Rule, which would have prevented them from using investor and depositor money in this way.
Right. Would have prevented this kind of casino capitalism from taking place. Yeah, absolutely. No, it shows once again that the global capitalist system is fundamentally broken, and it is fundamentally geared towards the interest of the 1%, to the disadvantage of the 99%. JP Morgan, the largest bank in the United States, right? I understand that the losses are going to be much, much higher.
Well, and it'll be really interesting to see that because as those losses grow, will this be something that then raises the questions about the stability of JP Morgan, but a lot of other banks that people thought had solid bank sheets this late in the game. But I'm going to read a social media post from Gene B, who was responding to our story about the foreclosure in Atlanta. I'm so glad that the Occupy movement has created subdivision that has really begun to combat foreclosure. That's Gene B via Facebook. So Occupy Wall Street supporters are declaring this next story a major legal victory. A photographer who was arrested during an Occupy Wall Street protest has been found not guilty of disorderly conduct. And this was thanks to video coverage or video footage presented by the defense. And so the person that we're talking about, Karanja, is Alexander Arbuckle. Am I saying that correctly? He was arrested and went through trial, and now he's been acquitted. People are championing this as a big win for Occupy Wall Street. I don't really understand why. Why is this such a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal because the police went on record essentially committing a perjury, lying that Alexander Arbuckle was arrested in the street, while in fact he was arrested on the sidewalk. And video showing police actually being the only people standing inside in the middle of the street, while Alexander Arbuckle the whole time was on the sidewalk. And ironically, Alexander Arbuckle was there to document the side of the police to show that in fact, some of them are reasonable.
Karanja, your audio is breaking up a little bit, but you had mentioned, and maybe Marcy, you can fill us in, what actually happened there that day. This was in September. This was a protest, and he was arrested among a group of people, and police said that he was marching in the street, was blocking traffic?
They did, yeah. I think the charges were that he was, disrupting traffic. And the big win was this video. It's, I've seen about an hour of it, and I think that's about how long it is. And it shows absolutely none of that. It shows a caravan of protesters on the sidewalk, obeying police orders, not being disorderly, not being disruptive. So as Karanja said, when
and you actually watched the video footage, and you said it was really boring.
It was kind of dull. I scrubbed through just to see where the excitement happened, and there really wasn't much. Yeah. It was a protest like any other, and you had a camera that was following.
And when presented at trial, that went against what the law enforcement story was.
It's what Karanja was saying. They essentially committed perjury in saying that he was being disruptive, and the video evidence shows exactly the opposite.
And so, Don, charges like this, tickets like this, they happen all the time, arrests at pretty much every single demonstration. Right. So getting this overturned at trial instead of maybe pleading it out, do you think that this sends some sort of message, or is it a is it a lesson that if you get arrested and it's
I think this is one of several. We're seeing now a pattern emerging across the country where the apparatus of the national security state is flexing its muscle and sending very threatening messages to Occupy protesters across the country. Look at what happened this past weekend in Chicago on the eve of the anti-NATO demonstrations, right? 3 or 4 young Occupy protesters were actually charged under anti-terrorism laws with supposedly plotting to blow up the Obama campaign headquarters. It turns out that the ACLU came out very strongly and said that the evidence was planted by undercover police, and that these young men were totally innocent.
And in that case that you bring up, Don, it's a little bit different in that these are federal terrorism charges involving the FBI and undercover agents. But you bring up a good point about the tactic of preemptive arrests leading up to big protests. And Karanja, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. NYPD and other law enforcement departments or officials using preemptive arrests or just arrests of large groups of people as a way to tamp down on protests.
Mm-hmm.
They have done this routinely where they arrested people that they reckoned were organizers early on. Early in the morning, for example, of big events, I've seen this happen in person, and they do it also. They also arrest huge numbers of people. I think the idea is to demotivate people, to lower morale. But clearly, the Occupy movement is here to stay. And people, as this last week's event have shown, people have only become more energized.
And so, Marcy, what is this? Is this really significant nationally, or just in New York among Occupy Wall Street activists?
Well, I would think it's pretty significant nationally because, this is the first case that's gone to trial, but it certainly isn't going to be the last, I think, because across the country, protesters have been getting arrested, for a slew of things. And so it'll be really, it'll be good to hear how other places and other cities and other protesters fare out as well, and the use of media also. In the past, it's thanks to media and video that a lot of Occupy Wall Street even came to the forefront, right? When we had the 700 protesters arrested back in September.
On the Brooklyn Bridge.
It was that video evidence that really brought it to the forefront for people and brought it to the mainstream
media. But of course, not all arrests are unjustified. I mean, a lot of the arrests that the police undertake are legally justified, or they do have a law or an ordinance that someone actually did violate, and some people do intentionally try to get arrested.
They do, because as an act of civil disobedience, you can disobey the law. That's part of the tactic that has been very successful in the civil rights movement and in the women's movement and anti-war movement, acts of civil disobedience. You actually consciously break the law, right? But you're not doing it in a violent fashion.
Well, let me bring this back finally to Karanja. Karanja, what is the lesson here in this story for you?
The lesson here is I do get a little distressed when we get too distracted by the police versus protesters, because that, I think, is the story that the 1% really wants to be told, while they commit fraud, likes of what by the way, the JP Morgan trade is a trade on $100 billion worth of stock. So the losses could be huge. So I don't want people to get distracted by the police versus protesters, because the police, essentially, as far as economically, are very much part of the 99%.
So the big issue for you, Karanja, is the big dealings and the shenanigans that are going on these big within these big Wall Street banks, and maybe that's where we should keep our focus.
Yeah, these gigantic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, Karanja Gashusha, he's an activist with Occupy Wall Street. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Here at Occupy the Media, we think it's important to share your stories. If you have a video you'd like to see on the program, email it to us or post it on our Facebook page. This next video, called You Felt It Your Whole Life, comes to us from trueactivist.com, a website dedicated to speaking truth to power. The video has a matrix feel to it and questions what truth would really look like. Take a look.
Hello, I'm Antoinette June with another Occupy update. Occupy Portland will be holding a general meeting on Wednesday, May 30th to focus on maintaining and improving the St. John's community. For more information, visit occupystjohns.wordpress.com.